So after looking at the components whereby we have looked at the strategies, the payoffs, and the players. Now the next critical area that we need to focus on are the principles. So there are two principles which are critical. One of them is Maximin principle. Under this principle, the maximizing player lists worst possible payoff of all his potential strategies and chooses that strategy which corresponds to the best. So when you talk about Maximin principle, it is that principle which the player will choose the worst possible course of action and then determines now the best out of the worst possible course of action from the strategies provided. Minimax principle, the maximizing player lists all the maximum losses from each strategy and select that which corresponds to the least. In other words, under the minimax principle, the minimizing player will only select the maximizing losses, the maximum outcome, and then pick the least of the maximum. That is all about principle. And this is how the pure strategy, in a pure strategy, the Maximin principle and the Minimax principle will be used. For this purpose, it becomes easy to determine the value of the game. So Maximin principle and the Minimax principle will help in the preparation of the value of the game. Now, how do you get the value of the game? Settle point becomes a critical component. What is settle point? It is a point at which the Maximin payoff is equals to the minimax. The Maximin payoff is equals to the minimax payoff. At this point, the value of the game is determined under a pure strategy. So remember, settle point becomes the determination of the value of the game. So if you want to know the value of the game, it is when you use the settle point. So the settle point will tell us the value of the game, what the players will earn after taking particular course of action. Now I want us to look at the payoff matrix. So this is how the payoff matrix looks like. So the payoff matrix, we have A and B. We have B strategy and A strategy. So we have A player and B player. And these are the payoffs. We have A, B, C, D. So these are the payoffs that you get if a player chooses particular strategy. A stands for maximizing player and B stands for minimizing player. So A will stand for maximizing player, the rows, and B stands for minimizing player, the columns. So the column will give us the minimizing player, the rows will give us the maximizing players. Now for us to make use of this, determine the value of the game, I want us to go direct to the problem. So we are given a problem here. There is a problem whereby we have at the top here we have player B, which is now the minimizing player, and we have player A, which is the maximizing player. And these are the strategies that actually they have undertaken. We have B1, B2, B3. A player is taking strategy A1, A2, and A3. Now it is of us to determine the settle point and the value of the game. Now, how do you determine the settle point and the value of the game? Very simple. Number one, we move to the maximizing player and identify the best outcome. No, the minimum or the lowest outcome. So we have mini. So we choose the minimum rows. Minimum rows. So we look for the minimum payoffs in each and every payoffs. So for in this case, we have 3, 2, 4. So the minimum is 2. So the minimum payoff is 2. And then we come to strategy A2. For player A2, we have -1, -2, 1, and -3. So we go for the minimum. So the minimum is -3, the worst, and then 0, -2, and 3. The minimum is -2. You select the worst possible payoff for each and every payoff, and you get the minimum rows. Now, for us to get, so these are the values that we'll be looking at. Then we move to the next one. We look at the maximum columns. Maximum columns. So in other words, we are looking at the best solution for each column. 3, -2, and 0. Which is the best? It is 3. B2, 2, 1, -2. Which is the best? -1, -2. 2 is the best. And then B3, 4, -3, -4, -3, 3. Which is the best? 4, the maximum. So in columns, you choose the maximum payoff. In rows, you choose the minimum payoffs. Now, how do you determine the settle point? The settle point is a point at which, so number one, we are determining the settle point. So the settle point for this case is the point at which the maximin is equals to minimax. So in our case, if you look very keenly, we have minimax row, we have 2, -3, and -2. In the maxi column, we have 3, 2, and 4. There is a value which is appearing on both sides, which is 2. So our settle point becomes 2. Our settle point becomes 2. So this is our settle point. Let me color it so that we can have a distinction. So for us to identify a settle point, it is the point at which the maximin value is equivalent to the minimax value. So in our case, the maximin value is equivalent to the minimax value, which is what? 2. So the settle point is equivalent to 2 from the problem. Number 2, determine the value of the game. First, the strategy. So the two players will employ which strategy? So which strategy is employed here? So the strategy employed here, A will go for A1 and B will go for B2. So that's actually the strategy which determines the settle point. Player A will go for strategy A1 and player B will go for strategy B2. So the value of the game. So the value of the game will be B A1. So the value of the game A1 and B2 gives us 2. So that's the value of the game. That's the payoff. So if the players are taking a decision and their decision will be based on the outcome, and the outcome which they get is 2. So our settle point becomes 2. The value of the game becomes 2. So the settle point maximum equals to minimax, which is equals to 2. Which strategy? So A will go for A1 and B will go for B2. So the value of the game A1 and B2 equals to 2. That is how to determine the settle point and the value of the game. Thank you.